All right, hello everybody. Today we're going to get into section 10.2. We touched on it yesterday. Today we're going to go continue on through it, kind of review it, and make sure that we're all feeling okay with the rest of chapter 10. All right, so number one, the first thing you need to do is make sure you get your form 10.1 checked. Answers key should be with the sub. If you have any questions, please let me know and double check that you get that done, ready for me to come back and get grades put in later on. Okay, so 10.2 is all about the stages of cellular respiration. So yesterday we talked about how heterotrophs have to eat different things to get energy, and so they also go through a process known as cellular respiration. And all cells actually go through cellular respiration in some way, shape, or form. And so how does this work? What are the stages? And then what is created in the end of cellular respiration? Okay, so the stages of cellular respiration starts with capturing the energy from food in three main stages. The very first stage is glycolysis. Glycolysis is the breaking down of sugar. So it takes in that sugar molecule through eating, and it's going to break it down into pyruvic acid, which is just a 6-carbon molecule. And then this is all going to occur within the cytoplasm of the cell. So again, glycolysis takes place where glucose that from eating is going to be broken down into 2 pyruvic acids. It then is going to move through a cycle called the Krebs cycle, which this is then going to occur in the mitochondria. It's considered an aerobic respiration because it requires oxygen for it to occur. Hence why when you breathe in, you breathe in oxygen, and you have to take in sugar to then continue through the process. Another name for the Krebs cycle is also known as the citric acid cycle. I would make sure you know that and have it written down somewhere. So what's happening here in the Krebs cycle is that pyruvic acid that was then created in glycolysis is going to be broken down into carbon dioxide in a series of energy extraction reactions. So what's going to happen, and I'll show you here in a second, is we continue in this cycle of taking this pyruvic acid, basically breaking it down to release carbon dioxide. So that's why every time you breathe out, you are releasing carbon dioxide, is through the Krebs cycle. Hans Krebs is a British biochemist. He was studying and demonstrated the citric acid cycle back in 1937 and really kind of honed in what it was and how it worked, explaining that when we take in sugar, break it down through glycolysis into pyruvic acid, we then continue through this Krebs cycle, which then is going to break down that pyruvic acid into carbon dioxide and some other molecules. So you can see here in the Krebs cycle, we start with this acetyl-CoA. That is part of the pyruvic acid that has been broken down. It gets transformed into this acetyl-CoA. And then what's happening is we're basically breaking down this sugar as it goes. So we have 6 carbon, it releases a carbon dioxide. We continue through. A hydrogen is then released through NADH and NADH+. Then we have 5 carbon, again going through NADH+, releasing more carbon dioxide. It's also releasing energy through ATP. And we are going through FADH, FAD, NADH, and NAD+. And so then it's going to continue through this cycle all the way around until we take in the next acetyl-CoA and then break that down. The big thing to know about the Krebs cycle is that it's going to be releasing carbon dioxide and a little bit of energy as it goes. Part 3 of cellular respiration, and the very last part, is the electron transport chain. We talked about this again in photosynthesis. Similar idea, but just a little bit different. So what's happening in the electron transport chain is it's using that high energy electrons from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle to convert ADP into ATP. This is one of the big parts that you'll want to know, is that it produces 38 ATP, carbon dioxide, and water, which is just the opposite of photosynthesis that we talked about last week. And so in the end, after we take in oxygen and sugar, we have the byproducts of 38 ATP, so energy, carbon dioxide, and water that then our body can use and release back out into the environment. So again, during the electron transport chain, the big thing that's going to occur is this ADP is going to go through ATP synthase. Again, that enzyme is going to build up our ATP and convert ADP into ATP that the molecule or that the cells like to use. Again, the highest amount of energy that works best for our cells to do whatever they need to do in their daily lives. We can also see here we have 2 hydrogen ions and an oxygen ion, or an oxygen diatomic. They're going to attach to then make water. So we can see how that would be one of our products. And then carbon dioxide was then created beforehand in the Krebs cycle. And so that was what makes our final products. Okay, so we talked about at the beginning that cellular respiration is considered an aerobic respiration. So you do need to know the difference between aerobic and anaerobic. Anaerobic respiration is releasing energy without the use of without the use of oxygen. So again, without the use of oxygen is an anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is the releasing with the use of oxygen. So aerobic, you have to have oxygen. Anaerobic is without. So first we're going to get into anaerobic respiration. So this is going to occur in the cytoplasm of the cell without the use of oxygen. So no oxygen is present. It is just looking at breaking down that pyruvic acid. So what's happening is something known as fermentation. So you'll hear a lot of times fermentation, especially used for like making miso, pickles, things like that, where they need to ferment, or the making of alcohol, things like that. It's basically breaking down pyruvic acid that is created after glycolysis, and then it going through this fermentation process to then create certain byproducts. So there are 2 types of fermentation that you'll need to know. The first one is alcohol fermentation. We tend to think about alcohol fermentation as in with plant cells. It does happen in animal cells as well, but on a very, very small level. So it's just easier to think of it in plant cells. So this occurs when plant cells have their pyruvic acid is converted into ethyl alcohol. So this is how things like wine and beer are created, is because whatever fruit or vegetable that is going to be fermented releases this ethyl alcohol once it's breaking down that pyruvic acid inside of it. The other type of lactic acid that occurs mostly in animal cells is lactic acid fermentation. So this is going to occur in the muscle cells of animals. And what's happening is, especially during exercise, when somebody's not getting enough oxygen to replenish that they need, their bodies are going to start releasing this lactic acid fermentation. And what happens is this lactic acid is building up into the muscle cells, and it's what causes your muscles to be sore. So a lot of times we'll see it in athletes at the very beginning of season when they're going to get into conditioning and everybody's really, really sore. That's because of that lactic acid. Your body and your muscles just aren't used to not having that much oxygen like you have before. And so that lactic acid builds up and then it makes your muscles really, really sore. There are different things you can do to try and reduce and break down the lactic acid that is collecting in the body to try and reduce the amount of soreness. And really, it's just trying to get that conditioning back up. Another thing that's happening inside of lactic acid fermentation is creating of 2 ATP molecules. So on top of this lactic acid that is being created, we're also creating that 2 ATP. Now, aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria of the cell with the use of oxygen. So again, aerobic respiration has to have oxygen. If it doesn't, it is not considered aerobic. Aerobic respiration in animal cells is 19 times more efficient than it is in a plant cell. That's because animals are constantly breathing in oxygen, and it's allowing for this cycle to continue, while plant cells are taking in more carbon dioxide than they are oxygen. The use of acetyl-CoA converts it into the Krebs cycle. Again, that Krebs cycle we've talked about just on the last couple of slides is where we're producing taking the pyruvic acid, breaking it apart, and then creating carbon dioxide and energy as well. And again, Hans Krebs was our guy behind it. Okay, so this chart here, you are gonna have to know. So the first thing to know is that we start at the very beginning with glucose. So glucose starts it, it goes through the process of glycolysis, and we create two pyruvic acids after glycolysis is done. There are two different paths that we can move from. We can continue to stay in the cytoplasm, and we will go through anaerobic respiration, where we have alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Alcohol fermentation, we're going to see ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, and 2 ATP being created. Lactic acid fermentation, we see lactic acid and that 2 ATP. So again, anaerobic isn't as efficient in creating of energy and carbon dioxide and that kind of thing that the body needs to do. And so ideally, we would like to move to aerobic respiration. Again, we start back at the very beginning with glucose to glycolysis and then to 2-pyruvic acid. From there, we're moving out of the cytoplasm into the mitochondria. We are then now considered to be in aerobic respiration because, again, oxygen has to be present. We convert that pyruvic acid into acetyl-CoA. It then goes into the Krebs cycle, where it's going to start breaking down into carbon dioxide and ATP. It'll then, after that, go into the electron transport chain, and where it'll break down even further, creating water and even more ATP. And then in the very end, we have our final products of carbon dioxide, water, and 38 ATP. And again, that's happening through this entire process from start all the way to finish. Again, start in the cytoplasm, work its way back to the mitochondria to then continue on through the aerobic respiration. So the big things to know is, one, we always are going to start with glucose, and then we're going to move it through glycolysis to then move on from there. This very beginning stage always is going to occur in the cytoplasm. So glycolysis is always taking place in the cytoplasm, and then fermentation, okay? And then once we get into aerobic respiration, that's when it's going to move into the mitochondria. Another thing to know is what is created in both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. The final product of an aerobic respiration would be carbon dioxide, water, and that 38 ATP, while anaerobic would be, depending if it's alcohol fermentation, ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, and the 2 ATP, or lactic acid and 2 ATP. Again, it is more effective to go through aerobic respiration than it is to go through anaerobic respiration. You will also, again, make sure you know where it's taking place for each section. And then what is the order? Because I can guarantee you this chart will show up on your test or quiz, and you'll need to know how to fill it in. There will be blanks, and you'll have to fill it in from there. All right, so super short and sweet today. Your homework is Form 10.2. Tomorrow you're going to be doing an escape room, so make sure you're ready for that over cellular respiration. If you have any questions, please let me know, and have a great rest of your day.